Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. You made it to the second half of day 3, so thanks for surviving this long. And I have to thank Bob as well for teeing up a couple of key points about startups as we go into this. So I'm the manager of the QAI Accelerator with Quantum City. I'll explain a bit of the alliance later on. But what I'm here to tell you is a little bit about what we've learned from working with startups. And unfortunately, I know Bob talked a lot about the technical aspects of the industry. When you're talking about startups and their survival rate, it's really business oriented. And I know most of the tech entrepreneurs that I work with, whenever they ask me a question and I give them the business answer, which is, it depends, it really frustrates them. So we'll go and talk about a bit of that. And it's really all spurred from this question that I get all the time. Are quantum startups different, right? And there are some differences, and there are some things we can explore. And I think a lot of times this question comes out because for the quantum startup entrepreneur who's doing the really, really tough work and slogging through building their business, they feel extremely isolated. And they have to wonder, am I the only person doing this? So what do we know about quantum startups? And Bob did mention, look, they're just deep tech startups, right? All of these things that are listed here are really well known to you, right? There's nothing new. Some of the things that are key and interesting to note when you think about a quantum startup versus a regular tech startup, they're definitely going to be selling to a larger corporation first. That goes without saying, right? There was no option for them to choose a B2C scenario. And the uncertainty, the time to market uncertainty is really apparent. And there are some in other deep tech sectors like clean tech, we see some of this issue when there isn't good things like carbon pricing, there isn't good financial certainty. So these are two things that really, really impact the quantum startup. You have to add into this, and Bob alluded to this as well, the political risk and regulation. I mean, for a sector that is still, and a market that is still so early on, to have export restrictions, as an example, already imposed on it, can make it very, very challenging. I think when Bob was mentioning how each country is kind of trying to develop their own quantum computing capability, that just doesn't make any sense. Right? So you're creating this sort of weird, artificial, and uneven playing field for these startups. The other one I want to focus on is really no global center. And what I mean by that is we're here in Silicon Valley. We're at ground zero for the semiconductor industry and the modern tech industry as we know it. Everything was happening here. Everything was happening in the US. With quantum, this is everywhere now. And you saw it through Bob's graphs. I'm going to have to pay Bob for teeing this up for me so easily. But there's no global center. Everyone's participating. And what we find is that a lot of these quantum startups have to move internationally basically from day one. And if you think about any other deep tech startup, whether it is biotech or, like I said, energy, they usually don't have to travel internationally immediately to get moving. And that's one of the biggest challenges, is no global center. So what do we do with this? And how do you sort of address the challenges with this? To start, I'm going to give you a bit of a story of where I'm from right now, which is Calgary. And 15 years ago, this is all you would see of Calgary and Alberta, is oil and gas. And I'm telling you this story because the province and the city actually had to go through this sort of transformation over time. And the oil and gas sector was always really dominant, but in 2015, there was a bit of a crash. The burgeoning tech sector that was there finally took control. I know, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of a company called iStock Photo, and I'm sure a lot of you do not know that it was founded in Calgary, and that the founders are still part of the Calgary tech community to this day. So, but that's okay because most Calgarians don't know that either. But that was a sign of the province and the city saying, you know what, there's a new future ahead. The future is past resource extraction. It's going to be a tech future. How do we prepare for that? you can kind of hear the analogies there, right? There's something coming in the future. We don't know when, but it's inevitable and it's going to happen, and we need to prepare for it. So Calgary kind of went on this journey. Calgary and Alberta kind of went on this journey of how do you transform a resource extraction economy into a tech economy. Now, Calgary had a lot of great things going for it on paper. It had a highly educated population, tons of engineers. All of the industry was really, really experienced in very, very large capital projects that spanned decades in terms of their timelines. There was a large concentration of corporate head offices, which meant you had all that management experience. You also had all the back office experience. You had all of the financing experience. All of that was there. The one kicker was that we had a lot of project managers, not product managers. And you know, when you're in the tech space, everything is about product management. So you can see here, Calgary looks great on paper for transition, but it was still super, super difficult. And it comes down to something that I like to call the lack of receptor capacity. The investors, the business minds, the skill that existed in Calgary was equipped to deal with a resource extraction problem. And now when you're putting a different paradigm in front of them, assets that are less tangible than reserves, right? You're looking at IP. They didn't know how to deal with it. And I'm not sure if any of you have seen this before, but this is a way of sort of identifying or categorizing your skill set, right? So they call it going from I, T, pi, because it's shaped like the symbol for pi, and the comb. And the idea is you really, if you're a comb personality or a comb type person, you're a generalist and you have various areas of expertise, right? I don't want to call it well-rounded because that would imply that the I and the T's are not well-rounded and something negative, right? But when you think of a quantum startup, when you think of a quantum founder, majority of you are coming out of your postgraduate studies, you have your PhDs, your postdocs, right? You're highly, highly specialized. If you spent a lot of your life in academia, you haven't seen much else. So you're maybe somewhere between an I and a T. When Calgary was trying to change diversify its economy, a lot of the entrepreneurs that were coming out of corporations were basically Ts, because they had a very, very deep skill set in one area, and they had a general knowledge about everything else. When you think about what a successful entrepreneur looks like, a successful tech entrepreneur, they are always combs in the end. Because when you think about what an entrepreneur has to do, what a CEO of a startup has to do, they need to be able to do a little bit of everything. And they need to be proficient in those things. So it's a large transformation you're making when we're asking a quantum entrepreneur to come out. They've spent so much time honing their skills in the quantum field, and now you're going to throw them into all the other things about running a business. So that's a big challenge. Something else to think about is when people are moving through this, there's a statistic, there's studies done on tech entrepreneurs where second and third time tech entrepreneurs have a greater chance of success than a first time entrepreneur. And you can see from this why. A second and third time entrepreneur is more likely to be in the comb segment than they would be in the I or T segment. So at QAI Ventures and at all the other support organizations across that are supporting quantum startups, whether it's a Duality, whether it's CDL Quantum, our job is basically to help entrepreneurs walk this journey and walk this journey as quickly as possible. Now, with QAI Ventures, we've seen we see a lot of startups from around the world. We actually ran a startup pitch competition on Tuesday. And I can tell you the participants in that competition came from Korea, came from Europe, came from the US, came from Canada, right? So going back to the quantum startup has to be international from day one. One of the challenges we've always had when we see these companies from around the world is that there is a huge amount of inconsistency in how they're trained. or the level of preparedness that they have, especially when they're coming out of their research institutions, right? So we've seen this especially in the QAI Ventures cohort when there's a lot of participants who are from different parts of Europe, even just within Europe. You'll see different levels of readiness or awareness around business and startup topics. Interestingly, as an example with IP strategy, when you think about a quantum startup and how critical intellectual property is to its value, that's an area that's really, really unknown to a lot of tech startups. Forget quantum. The Canadian government has actually initiated a program to help unlock intellectual property out of research institutions and to help these innovators come up with intellectual property strategies, not just patents, but strategies overall, to enable them along the commercialization path. Financial acumen goes without saying. Most tech startups, most tech entrepreneurs, financial acumen is very difficult. And if you think about the journey of a quantum startup and how long it's going to be, financial acumen is even more critical, just because of the sheer number of rounds you'll be doing, maybe the M&A that'll be happening, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of inconsistency. The University of Calgary has really started pushing the idea that they want their researchers to commercialize. So they actually tout the fact that in Canada, they are the #1 startup creator of all post-secondaries across Canada. Now, the consequence of that is I had a conversation with a PhD student in the summer, and she was telling me about her a quantum PhD student. She was telling me about her technology, how she wanted to commercialize it. And then she says, well, the question I have is, I've got a list of 10 things I have to do. And she read them all out to me. And 5 or 6 of the 10 items were actually business and startup related, which to me was a relief, because it wasn't all about, I need more equipment, I need to build this out. It wasn't just all technology. There was an awareness, at least, that there was a lot of other stuff to build around the business for commercialization to work. But that's where it's very inconsistent around the world, and that can be really, really challenging. This diagram looks really simple, but it is the thing that all startups are looking for, product market fit. And it is the thing where most of them will fail. As Bob mentioned, statistically, like 90% of them will fail. So if we look at this diagram for a bit, the startups, a quantum startup, can be anything. It's a solution, but it doesn't know the exact problem it's trying to solve just yet. And if you think about the regular, all other technology sectors, when the startup is looking at the industry cog, it can kind of see what it is. If you're a fintech startup, you can look at the companies you're trying to serve and kind of get an understanding for what their needs are. You can talk to them. They'll disclose their business problems. You can look at your competition and get to see what it is that they're doing. There's a lot of ways you can explore and understand what that industry gear looks like and what you would have to do to be able to mesh with that gear. I know a lot of you who are startups here, and a lot of the discussions that are going on at this event, at this conference, are about how, well, a lot of times industry doesn't even know what quantum can do and what problems it can solve. There was a panel on Tuesday where they were talking about defense and the uses of quantum in defense. And actually, the entrepreneur representative on that panel was Steve Blank. Those of you who may or may not know, Steve Blank is one of the godfathers of the lean startup, along with Eric Ries, right here in Silicon Valley. And they kept talking about the disconnect that exists between defense, the Department of Defense, and the solution providers, or the innovators that are out there, and how there's no real good communication channel. If you think about that communication channel not existing, that's where the gears just the teeth don't mesh at all, and they're separated. They may not even be the same shape. So this is really, really challenging, and we see this in some clean tech sectors as well, where industries kind of keep playing their cards close to their chest, and the startups and the innovators are out there just asking for problems to solve, right? So there is something that can be done here for industry where, there's something that can be done for industry where industry can get involved. And this is baked into the theory of change that the founder of QAI Ventures, the founding of QAI Ventures, was spurred by. Thomas Stralin, he's part of a family office that is behind the Schindler Elevator Company. And if you think about elevators, it's heavy machinery, it's real estate development, it's heavy manufacturing, right? But when they decided, you know what, we want to do something impactful, they picked quantum. So they're making that mental shift. They funded the development of Uptown Basel, which is this campus in Basel, just in Switzerland. And our friends at IonQ just commissioned their first quantum computer on the main floor of that building. The funny thing about this picture is that if you see the towers in the background in the skyline there, that's the Novartis campus, right? So again, looking at changing the local economy. But the idea around placing a bet and also committing to seeing the development, seeing the development of the ecosystem and building that capability for industry and startups to collide and work together. And again, QAI Ventures is just like all the other quantum startups, realized the need to go international immediately, which is why they created the partnership with Quantum City out of the University of Calgary. So the Quantum City team, the QAI Ventures team, really all motivated to promote the adoption of technologies. So you'll notice up to now, my slides have had no units of any kind. My slides have had no numbers because it's about adoption. It's not really about the tech. And even though Quantum City is affiliated with the University of Calgary, it is not really working towards the research part that's handled by the university. It is really around how do we get industry involved in a conversation about how to adopt quantum solutions. So, we talked a lot about startups, but industry in particular, because if you're a large multinational, you likely look at your organization and think, well, we're basically a comb, because we've got all the different types of specializations, we've got all the different types of expertise. But when you think about your innovation teams and the teams that you have that are here, or the people that are here at this event, the people that are talking to the startups, are they combs or are they actually Ts? If personality-wise and skill set-wise they are combs and they are generalists, do they have accountability that also reflects that cross-disciplinary capability? Or are they really just being narrowed down to one department within your organization? And that's something to think about, because I think the next piece around what you can do is really, really important. So for startups, what can you do going forward? You have to become a comb. You need to share your journey so that your fellow startups don't feel like they're isolated. But you need to rethink scale as well, right? Like we talked about all of this quantum computing stuff. You know that startups are always driving towards an MVP. What is the smallest unit of value I can deliver? But for industry, those of you in the room from industry, the call to action to you is, do you have combs? Are you able to speak? Is there someone who can speak to the quantum innovator in a way that it represents almost your whole organization, right? So that problems can really be discussed, so that use cases can really be discussed. I know with all the talk of like who's doing what, when, and how things are progressing, there seems like to be a lot of risk in the system. And people will often view startups as risky. I always view startups as really good risk mitigators, because a good startup entrepreneur might have a list of 30 risks that they have to deal with, but they know that only risk number 5 and risk number 20 are the ones they have to deal with today. And if they live to see another day to deal with the rest of them, then that's great. So I think from an industry perspective, changing your mindset, changing how you interact can really, really improve the communications, because what the startups need is a feedback loop. They need a feedback loop into what is going on, how does this work, did this deliver value, did it not? Those are all challenges that they're trying to solve right now. Rethink scale, again, this doesn't need to be a corporate-wide deployment. And you have a unique opportunity to help shape the sector, which really, when was the last time you had that opportunity? So I think those are really, really key aspects. Those are things that we're working on. Please connect with us. QAI Ventures is actually running an accelerator cohort in Calgary starting in March. There is a Basel cohort starting in May. And if you're a startup company, those applications are open. Quantum City is opening their collision space Q Hub in March as well, and they run an annual meeting called Q Connect, which is actually very industry driven, very few numbers, very few units on the slides. So yes, so hopefully that gives you some call to action, whether you're industry or whether you're a startup. Thanks. And the winner of the startup pitch competition will be announced at the finale. Thanks.